You're illiterate, aren't you? The sentence didn't just land. It echoed, sharp and deliberate, slicing through the quiet luxury of a Manhattan restaurant where every plate cost more than most people's weekly groceries and every conversation hummed with quiet power. Glasses paused midair. Forks hovered above porcelain. No one laughed, not yet. Daniel Whitmore leaned back in his chair, confidence wrapped around him like a custom-tailored suit, the kind that whispered money without ever needing to shout. He didn't look at Amara Brooks as a person, not really. To him, she was part of the background, like the dim amber lighting or the soft jazz floating through the room. Replaceable. Invisible. He slid the wine list across the table with 2 fingers, casual, almost bored. Go on, he added, voice smooth, controlled, the kind of tone that expected obedience. Amara stood still, tray balanced in one hand, posture straight, eyes calm but unreadable. She had heard tones like that before. Not always the same words, but always the same meaning. Beneath the surface, something flickered, not anger, not fear, something quieter, something older. Around them, the room watched without pretending not to. A couple at the next table exchanged glances. A man in a navy suit leaned back slightly, curious. The manager near the bar froze mid-step, already calculating risk, reputation, damage. 5 seconds passed. Then 6. Long enough for discomfort to grow teeth. Daniel smirked, just a fraction, as if the silence proved his point. As if he had already won. But Amara didn't rush. She didn't apologize. She didn't shrink. She simply looked at the menu resting in front of him, then lifted her gaze, not up, not down, but level. And in that moment, something shifted, so subtle most people missed it, but powerful enough to change everything that came next. Because this wasn't just a test of reading. It was a test of who was allowed to be seen, who was allowed to be heard, and who decided what intelligence looked like in a room built on appearances. Daniel thought he controlled the table. He thought he controlled the narrative. What he didn't realize, not yet, was that the quietest person in the room had already begun to rewrite it. No one spoke. Not because they had nothing to say, but because something about the moment demanded silence. Amara set the tray down gently on the edge of the table, the faint clink of glass against polished wood sounding louder than it should have. Daniel watched her now, really watched her, as if trying to decide whether she was worth the attention he had just given her. To him, this was entertainment, a brief interruption in a night designed to reinforce his control, his image, his certainty. He tapped the edge of the menu with his finger, slower this time, more deliberate. Well, he said, voice quieter, but sharper, like a blade that did not need to swing hard to cut. Read it. Around them, the air tightened. A woman at the bar leaned in, pretending to check her phone while listening closely. The manager took a small step forward, then stopped, unsure whether stepping in would help or make things worse. Moments like this were dangerous, not because of what was said, but because of what they revealed. Amara reached for the menu, her fingers steady, unhurried. She did not rush to prove anything. She did not move like someone trying to defend herself. She moved like someone choosing her moment. Her eyes scanned the page briefly, not searching, not struggling, simply confirming something she already knew. Daniel leaned back again, confidence returning, mistaking her calm for hesitation. He had seen this before, or at least he thought he had. People folding under pressure. People shrinking when the spotlight turned harsh. That was how the world worked, in his experience. Pressure revealed weakness. But Amara did not fold. She lifted her head slowly, meeting his gaze without challenge, without submission. Just presence. Then she spoke, soft enough that the room leaned in, but clear enough that every word landed exactly where it needed to. Not in English. The first sentence flowed in French, smooth and precise, the pronunciation effortless, the rhythm natural, like it belonged to her. A man at the next table blinked, caught off guard. Daniel's smirk paused, just for a second, not gone, but interrupted. Amara continued, transitioning seamlessly, not stopping, not explaining. Japanese followed, equally fluid, equally controlled. The room shifted again. This was no longer a mistake. This was something else. Something no one had prepared for. Daniel straightened slightly, his fingers still resting on the edge of the table, but no longer tapping. He was listening now, even if he did not realize it yet. Amara's voice remained calm, measured, as she moved into Arabic, then Spanish, then German, each language unfolding like a quiet answer to a question he should never have asked. No raised voice, no dramatic pause, just certainty. And with every word, the balance in the room tilted, slowly at first, then all at once. Because power, the kind Daniel believed in, loud, visible, undeniable, had just met something quieter, something harder to dismiss. And for the first time that night, Daniel Whitmore was no longer the one controlling the room. The last word settled into the air like a final note that refused to fade. No one moved. Not the couple near the window, not the bartender polishing a glass that had long been clean, not even the manager who now stood completely still, caught between stepping in and witnessing something he did not fully understand. Amara's voice had stopped, but its presence remained, filling the space in a way silence rarely could. Daniel Whitmore did not speak immediately. That alone said everything. A man known for answers, for control, for always having the final word now sat with none. His eyes stayed on her, searching, recalculating, as if trying to fit what he had just heard into a version of reality that still made sense to him. But it did not fit. It refused to. The room, once centered around him, had shifted its gravity. Conversations that had paused did not resume. Instead, they waited. Not for him, but for her. Amara did not rush to fill the silence. She did not explain herself, did not soften the moment, did not offer the kind of reassurance people often gave when they made others uncomfortable. She simply stood there, steady, composed, her presence no longer invisible. Daniel finally leaned forward, slowly this time, his confidence no longer effortless but assembled piece by piece. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, the edge in his voice replaced by something quieter, something closer to curiosity than control. It was the first real question he had asked all night. Amara tilted her head slightly, considering him, not as a superior, not as a threat, but as a man who had just realized he did not know as much as he thought he did. "Places like this," she replied calmly. "Listening." A few guests exchanged glances. The answer was simple, but it carried weight, because it exposed something deeper than skill. It exposed attention, observation, time spent watching while others assumed she was not worth noticing. Daniel exhaled, almost imperceptibly, his fingers now still against the table. He had built his world on knowing who mattered and who did not, on reading people quickly, efficiently, profitably. But he had misread her completely. And in a room where perception was everything, that kind of mistake did not go unnoticed. Amara reached for the tray again, lifting it with the same quiet precision she had always had, but now every movement was seen. Not as service, but as choice. She placed the wine list back exactly where it had started, aligning it with the edge of the table as if resetting the moment on her terms. Then she looked at Daniel one last time, not waiting for approval, not seeking reaction. "Would you like a recommendation?" she asked, her tone professional, even, unchanged. But the meaning beneath it had shifted entirely, because now the question was no longer about wine. It was about who in that room truly understood value. And for the first time that night, Daniel Whitmore hesitated. Daniel did not answer right away, and in a room where he was used to speaking first and last, that pause stretched longer than anyone expected. His eyes flicked to the wine list, then back to Amara, as if the object in front of him had suddenly become unfamiliar, like a language he no longer fully understood. Around them, the atmosphere shifted again, not with tension this time, but with awareness. People were no longer watching a scene. They were witnessing a reversal. Daniel cleared his throat softly, a small, almost human sound that did not match the image he had built so carefully over the years. "Go ahead," he said finally, but the words lacked their earlier sharpness. They were not a command anymore. They were permission, and even that felt uncertain. Amara gave a slight nod, not submissive, not performative, just acknowledgement. She reached for a bottle on the tray, her movements smooth, deliberate, every action controlled without effort. "This one is from Napa Valley," she began, her voice calm, steady, carrying just enough to reach beyond the table without demanding attention. A small vineyard, family-owned, known for balance rather than show. She did not rush her words. She let them breathe, the way someone does when they understand that value does not need to be forced. Daniel listened, but this time, he was not evaluating. He was absorbing. That alone was new. Amara continued, briefly noting the notes of the wine, the texture, the finish, but she spoke in a way that felt less like selling and more like translating something deeper. Not just the product, but the intention behind it. A man seated nearby leaned in slightly, clearly interested now, not in the wine, but in her. The manager, still frozen at the edge of the room, lowered his shoulders just a fraction, sensing that whatever had just happened had moved beyond his control. Daniel picked up his glass slowly, almost thoughtfully, as if the act itself required a different kind of attention than before. He took a small sip, not out of habit, but with intention. Then he set the glass down carefully, aligning it with the edge of the table, mirroring the precision Amara had shown earlier. It was subtle, but it was there. A shift. He looked at her again, not over her, not through her, but at her. Really at her. "That is good," he said, choosing his words more carefully than he had at the start of the night. It was not praise. It was recognition. And in a room built on hierarchy, recognition carried weight. Amara simply nodded once more, not lingering on the moment, not claiming it. She turned slightly, preparing to step away, returning to the rhythm of the room, but the rhythm had changed. Conversations began to resume, but quieter now, more aware. The energy no longer revolved around one man's presence. It had expanded, and Daniel Whitmore, for the first time that evening, did not try to take it back. He sat there, watching her move away, the question he had not asked still lingering in his mind, heavier now than before. Because it was no longer just curiosity. It was realization. And realization, once it begins, does not easily stop. Amara moved through the room as if nothing had changed, but everything had. The same tables, the same polished floors, the same quiet hum of wealth and conversation. Yet now every step she took carried a different weight. Not heavier, just seen. A man who had ignored her earlier now paused before speaking, offering a small nod as she passed. A woman who had not looked up from her phone minutes ago now watched her with open curiosity. It was subtle, but it was real. Respect does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it shifts the air first. Behind her, Daniel remained seated, but his attention did not return to his phone, or his business partner, or even his glass. It stayed on her. Not in the way he had looked before, dismissive, distracted, but focused, as if trying to understand something that had slipped past him for years. His partner across the table leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Do you know her?" he asked, half joking, half serious. Daniel did not answer right away. That question, simple as it sounded, carried more weight now than it should have. Because the honest answer was no. He did not know her. Not her name, not her story, not the quiet depth behind the calm presence he had dismissed minutes ago. And that realization unsettled him more than he expected. "No," he said finally, but the word felt incomplete, like it did not capture the truth of what he was beginning to see. Across the room, Amara paused near the service station, setting down an empty tray with the same careful precision she had shown all night. One of the younger servers approached her, eyes wide, voice barely above a whisper. "How did you do that?" he asked, not mocking, not doubting, just genuinely curious. Amara gave a small smile, the kind that did not seek attention. "Practice," she said simply. No explanation. No performance. Just truth. Because the answer was not impressive on its own. What made it powerful was the discipline behind it, the hours no one saw, the effort no one applauded, the consistency that built something others assumed could not exist in someone like her. Back at the table, Daniel reached for the wine list again, but this time, he did not slide it across the table. He held it in his hands, scanning it slowly, almost thoughtfully, as if trying to see it through a different lens. The same words, the same layout, but it did not feel the same. Because now he knew that understanding was not about access. It was about awareness. And awareness had just cost him his certainty. He set the menu down again, exhaling quietly, his posture no longer leaning back in control, but forward in consideration. For a man who had built an empire on quick judgments, fast decisions, and sharp instincts, slowing down felt unfamiliar. But necessary. His gaze lifted once more, finding Amara across the room, now engaged with another table, her voice calm, her presence steady, unchanged by what had just happened. That, more than anything, stayed with him. Not the languages, not the moment, but the fact that she had not needed it to define her. And somewhere between that realization and the quiet return of the room's rhythm, a new question formed in Daniel Whitmore's mind, one he had never needed to ask before. Not about what she could do, but about who she really was. And for the first time in a long time, he did not already think he knew the answer. The question did not leave him alone. It stayed there, quiet but persistent, sitting in the back of Daniel's mind like a detail that refused to be ignored. Who is she really? Not what she did, not what she showed, but who she was before this room ever saw her. He leaned back again, but the posture felt different now, less like control and more like distance, as if he needed space to think. Around him, conversations had resumed, but they carried a different tone, softer, more aware, like everyone had just witnessed something that shifted their understanding, even if they could not fully explain it. His partner spoke again, trying to pull him back into familiar ground, numbers, projections, the language Daniel usually commanded without effort. But the words felt thinner now, less important, like they belonged to a version of the night that no longer existed. Daniel nodded at the right moments, responded when expected, but his attention drifted, returning again and again to the same point across the room. Amara. Not performing, not proving, just working. The simplicity of it unsettled him more than anything else. Because if what she had done was not a performance, then it was something else entirely. Something real. And real things could not be dismissed as easily. Across the floor, Amara moved between tables with the same steady rhythm, her voice calm, her presence consistent, as if nothing about the night had changed her pace. A guest asked her a question about a dish, and she answered with the same clarity she had shown before, no shift. In tone, no trace of the moment that had just redefined the room. That consistency did not come from confidence alone. It came from knowing who she was long before anyone else noticed. Daniel watched that more closely than he realized. The absence of reaction. The absence of ego. In his world, moments like that were currency. People leveraged them, amplified them, turned them into advantage. But she had not. She had simply returned to her work. That, more than anything, challenged him. Because it suggested that what she carried was not built for display. It was built to exist, whether anyone saw it or not. He exhaled slowly, his fingers brushing the edge of the table, grounding himself in something familiar. But the familiar no longer held the same weight. The certainty he relied on, the quick judgments, the ability to define a room within seconds, it all felt slightly off now, like a system that had worked perfectly until it met something it was never designed to measure. And that realization did not come with noise. It came quietly. The kind of quiet that changes how a person sees everything that follows. He looked down at his glass, then back up again, scanning the room not for control, but for understanding. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel Whitmore was not thinking about what he could gain from a situation. He was thinking about what he had missed. And the more he considered that, the more it became clear that this was not just about one moment or one mistake. It was about a pattern, a way of seeing the world that had served him well, until it did not. And now, sitting in the same chair, in the same room, surrounded by the same signs of success, he felt something unfamiliar settle in. Not doubt, not regret, something deeper. Awareness. And once awareness begins, it does not ask for permission to grow. Awareness did not announce itself. It did not arrive with a dramatic shift or a clear conclusion. It settled quietly, changing how Daniel saw the same room he had walked into just an hour earlier. The lighting had not changed. The music still drifted softly through the air. The conversation still carried the same polished tones of influence and status. But the meaning behind it all felt different now, thinner somehow, less certain. He sat there, hands resting lightly on the table, no longer gripping control, no longer directing the rhythm of the evening. Instead, he observed, not as a strategist, not as a man calculating advantage, but as someone noticing what had always been there and somehow overlooked. Across the room, Amara continued moving from table to table, her presence steady, her voice even, her focus unchanged. She did not glance toward him. She did not check if he was still watching. She did not need to. That absence of acknowledgement was not dismissal. It was independence. And that, more than anything, unsettled him in a way he could not immediately explain. Because in his world, attention was currency. People sought it, measured it, competed for it. But she operated outside of that system entirely. She was not performing for approval. She was not reacting to recognition. She was simply existing within her own standard. Daniel leaned forward slightly, elbows resting near the edge of the table, his posture no longer signaling dominance, but engagement. His partner had stopped speaking entirely now, sensing that whatever business they had come to discuss had been replaced by something less predictable and far more personal. A question hovered at the edge of Daniel's thoughts, not about language, not about skill, but about choice. Why here? Why this role? Why remain unseen when clearly she had the ability to stand anywhere else? The question was not judgmental. It was genuine, and that difference mattered. He watched as another guest attempted to engage her beyond the usual exchange, asking where she was from, how she had learned what she knew. Amara answered politely, briefly, without expanding the conversation beyond what was necessary. She did not build a narrative around herself. She did not offer details that invited admiration. She kept her answers simple, grounded, controlled. It was not avoidance. It was intention. She chose what to reveal and what to keep. That level of control, quiet and unspoken, mirrored a kind of power Daniel recognized, but had never expected to find in someone he had dismissed so easily. He exhaled slowly, the realization settling deeper now. Power was not always loud. It was not always visible. Sometimes it was the ability to remain unchanged in a room that expected you to shrink or perform. Sometimes it was restraint. And restraint, he realized, required more strength than dominance ever had. His gaze dropped briefly to the table, then lifted again, finding her once more as she moved through the space with the same measured rhythm. No hesitation. No need to prove anything further. The moment had passed for everyone else. For him, it had just begun. Because once you see someone clearly for the first time, you cannot return to the version of them you created before. And Daniel Whitmore understood that now, even if he had not yet decided what to do with it. The room moved on, but Daniel did not. Time seemed to split for him, one version continuing with polite conversations and quiet laughter, the other slowing down, focusing on something far more significant than any deal he had planned that night. He stood up, not abruptly, not to reclaim attention, but with a measured intent that felt unfamiliar even to himself. His partner looked up, surprised, but said nothing. Daniel adjusted his jacket, a habit born from years of control, yet this time it felt less like preparation and more like grounding. Across the room, Amara was finishing with another table, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, her focus precise. She turned slightly, preparing to move toward the service station again, and for the first time that evening, Daniel stepped into her path. Not to block, not to assert, but to meet. "Excuse me," he said, and the words carried a different weight now. Softer. Real. Amara stopped, not startled, not hesitant, simply acknowledging his presence the same way she would any guest. "Yes, sir," she replied, her tone professional, even, unchanged by everything that had happened. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, but because the next words mattered in a way Daniel was not used to considering. He had built a life on speaking quickly, deciding faster, but this required something else. He looked at her, not searching for weakness, not measuring value, but trying to understand the person he had misjudged so completely. "Earlier," he began, then paused, recalibrating. "I was wrong." The sentence was simple, but in a room like this, from a man like him, it carried more weight than any announcement. A nearby table fell quiet again, not obviously, but enough to feel the shift. Amara held his gaze, not surprised, not impressed, just present. She did not rush to accept it. She did not dismiss it. She let it exist on its own. Daniel continued, his voice steady, but no longer sharpened by ego. "I made an assumption, and I should not have. It was not a perfect apology. It was not rehearsed. It was something rarer. Honest. The kind of honesty that comes not from obligation, but from realization." Amara gave a small nod, acknowledging his words without amplifying them. "I understand," she said. No bitterness. No validation. Just clarity. And somehow, that response carried even more weight than his apology. Because it did not reward him. It did not elevate him. It simply placed the moment where it belonged. As something that had happened, and something that did not define her. Daniel stood there for a second longer, as if expecting something more, a conversation, a reaction, a shift that would bring things back into a structure he understood. But it did not come. Instead, Amara adjusted the tray in her hand slightly and asked, "Is there anything else I can assist you with?" The question was familiar, routine, but now it meant something entirely different. It was no longer about service. It was about choice, about whether he would continue to see her through the lens he had created, or whether he would step fully into the understanding he had just begun to form. Daniel looked at her, then at the room, then back at her again. And for the first time that night, he realized that what he said next would not just reflect who she was. It would reveal who he was willing to become. Daniel did not look away this time. He held her gaze, not as a challenge, not as a test, but as a decision unfolding in real time. The room around them seemed to quiet again, not completely, but enough for the moment to stand on its own. He took a small breath, the kind that signals a shift not just in words, but in direction. "Yes," he said finally, his voice steady, but different now. "Actually, I would." It was not a command. It was not even a request in the way he used to speak. It was an opening. Amara waited, giving him the space to continue, her posture unchanged, her expression calm, as if she understood that whatever came next was not about her proving anything, but about him understanding something. Daniel glanced briefly at the table, then back at her. "I would like your recommendation," he said, more clearly this time, each word chosen with intention. It was a simple sentence, but simplicity, in this moment, carried more weight than anything complex, because it meant he was no longer relying on assumption. He was choosing to listen. Amara nodded once, acknowledging the request without hesitation, without surprise. She reached for the wine list again, not as something to prove, but as something to share. "If you are open to it," she began, her voice calm and measured, "there is another option. Less known, but more balanced." Daniel listened closely, not interrupting, not redirecting, not filtering her words through his own expectations. Around them, a few guests pretended not to watch, but their attention lingered, drawn to the quiet transformation happening in plain sight. Amara described the wine briefly, not with excess detail, not with performance, but with clarity. She spoke of the vineyard, the climate, the intention behind it, the way it was made to be experienced rather than displayed. And as she spoke, it became clear that she was not just offering a recommendation. She was offering perspective, a way of seeing value that did not rely on price or reputation alone. Daniel nodded slowly, absorbing each word, allowing it to settle without rushing to respond. When she finished, he looked at her, not with evaluation, but with recognition. "That sounds right," he said. And this time, the words were not about the wine. Amara gave a slight nod, then turned to prepare the selection, her movement steady, unchanged by the weight of the moment. She did not linger. She did not look back, because she did not need to. The shift had already happened. Daniel remained standing for a second longer before returning to his seat, but even that movement felt different now, less like reclaiming position and more like returning with awareness. He picked up his glass again, but did not drink immediately. Instead, he looked around the room once more, seeing it through a lens that no longer filtered people into categories of importance and invisibility. The same room, the same people, but not the same understanding. And somewhere between that realization and the quiet continuation of the evening, something settled into place. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. Because power, he realized, was never just about being heard. It was about knowing when to listen. And dignity, the kind he had overlooked so easily, did not need recognition to exist. It simply waited for the moment someone was ready to see it.